Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into over a millennium of history to understand exactly how ancient Greece became the foundational blueprint for Western civilization. From the radical invention of democracy to the very math that literally built the modern world, this is a story of profound innovation, brutal conflict, and an enduring legacy that still absolutely shapes how we think today. Let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the rise of the city-states, move into the classical Golden Age, cover Alexander and Hellenistic expansion, look at society, science, and culture, and finally wrap up with how Greece became the cradle of Western civilization.
Okay, part 1, the rise of the city-states. To anchor ourselves, let's take a quick look at this timeline. It shows how Greek civilization evolved over a massive span of 1,500 years. Following the Bronze Age collapse, Greece actually entered a 3-century Dark Age. But as we move into the Archaic period in the 8th century BC, things start to shift. Urban centers begin to form, and that leads us right into the legendary Classical period, followed by the vast Hellenistic expansion, and finally culminating in Roman integration. It's a huge sweep of time, but it all really starts with how the Greeks organized themselves geographically. You see, the harsh, incredibly mountainous geography of the Greek peninsula made building a single giant empire virtually impossible. Instead of one unified nation, this rugged terrain birthed hundreds of fiercely independent city-states which were known as polis. Now, while they all shared a language, a religion, and a basic culture, these city-states were very distinct political entities. They valued their independence above almost anything else, paving the way for some incredibly intense regionalism and competition.
Which brings us to part 2, the Classical Golden Age. Now, we have a really stark contrast between the two preeminent powerhouses of the classical era. On one side, you have Athens. This was a radical democracy and a naval superpower, with a vast fleet completely funded by lucrative silver mines. They became the ultimate cultural and philosophical hub of Greece. But on the exact opposite end of the spectrum was Sparta. Sparta was a diarchy, meaning they were ruled by 2 kings and a council of elders. They were fiercely dedicated to producing elite land warriors, and their entire society was sustained by a massive, brutalized slave population. So, total opposites, right? Yet, as we'll see, they would soon desperately need each other. When the massive Achaemenid Persian Empire looked west, these fractured rivals had to temporarily unite and pool their resources. It all started with the Ionian Revolt, which really drew the ire of the Persian king, Darius. But then, at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, a heavily outnumbered Athenian force somehow stunned the Persians. 10 years later, Darius' son, Xerxes, returned. And this gives us the legendary stand of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. They basically bought enough time for the Athenian navy to secure a decisive victory at Salamis, which was then followed by a final land victory at Plataea. By combining their distinct strengths, this fractured civilization managed to repel the greatest empire on Earth.
But as you might guess, the alliance didn't last. Sparta grew super suspicious of Athens' growing wealth and how they were transforming the Delian League into a full-blown Athenian empire. So, Sparta went to war. The Peloponnesian War was this grueling, decades-long conflict of pure attrition. It saw a devastating plague ravage Athens, which ended up killing their great statesman Pericles. Then Athens massively overplayed its hand with a disastrous naval expedition to Syracuse in Sicily, where they lost almost their entire army and fleet. Finally, backed by Persian money, ironic I know, Sparta blockaded Athens' harbor and forced them to surrender in 404 BC. Essentially, the Golden Age had devoured itself.
Moving on to part 3, Alexander and Hellenistic expansion.
So, while Athens, Sparta, and Thebes were busy exhausting themselves in these endless wars, King Philip II of Macedon swooped right in. By 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, he defeated a Greek alliance and effectively united Greece under the League of Corinth. But after he was assassinated, his young son, Alexander the Great, took the reins. And Alexander didn't just maintain control of Greece, he launched an unprecedented military campaign that completely conquered the Persian Empire, stretching his domain all the way to India before his sudden death in 323 BC.
After his death, Alexander's generals violently divided up his massive empire, and this birthed the Hellenistic period. Now, this is a fascinating era because traditional Greek culture didn't just export itself, it actually blended with Macedonian and Near Eastern traditions. Greek influence suddenly stretched all the way from the Mediterranean clear across to present-day Afghanistan.
This huge expansion led to a major cultural shift. Alexander's conquest sparked a massive wave of immigration. Young, ambitious Greeks left the traditional mainland city-states and flocked to new, incredibly wealthy megacities like Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria. Alexandria, with its famous library and museum, became the new global epicenter of scholarship. It effectively moved the entire center of the Greek world completely away from mainland Greece itself.
All right, let's look at part 4, society, science, and culture.
Now, we definitely need to contextualize these Greek ideals. While it's true that Greece birthed democracy, it was a highly stratified society. Full citizenship and legal protection were exclusively reserved for free, native-born, land-owning men. Women primarily managed households and had heavily restricted rights. Then you had metiques, or resident foreigners, who could live and work there but had absolutely no political voice. And at the very bottom were slaves, who possessed zero political rights and were treated simply as property.
It is honestly shocking, but it's absolutely vital to understand that between 40 and 80% of classical Athens' population were slaves. This was the dark engine behind their golden age. The immense wealth and the sheer amount of free time that allowed Athenian citizens to participate in radical democracy, create stunning art, and debate philosophy, all of that was directly sustained by the forced labor of their slave population.
And over in Sparta, this dynamic was even more extreme. They relied on a unique class of state-owned slaves called helots. These were neighboring Macedonians who had been subjugated en masse. The helots were forced to do literally all the agricultural labor so that Spartan men could devote 100% of their lives to military training. It created a society built on unparalleled military prowess for sure, but also on the constant paranoid fear of a helot uprising.
But, despite these much darker social realities, the ancient Greek capacity for reasoning and invention was just staggering. A brilliant example of this is the Antikythera mechanism, which was actually discovered in a shipwreck. Dating back to around 80 BC, this device used incredibly complex differential gears to calculate astronomical positions. It is, quite literally, the world's first analog computer. The miniaturization and complexity we see in this thing wouldn't be matched again until 18th century clockmaking. It's just wild to think about.
And honestly, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Greek thinkers started applying radical, new naturalistic reasoning to the world around them. Eratosthenes used shadows to accurately estimate the circumference of the Earth. Aristarchus suggested a heliocentric solar system, meaning the Earth revolved around the Sun centuries before Copernicus did. Hippocrates actually separated medicine from religion, founding it as a true, distinct profession. Meanwhile, over in the cultural sphere, public competitions in Athens birthed the deeply complex theatrical genres of tragedy and comedy that we literally still consume today.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Cradle of Western Civilization.
Greek political independence officially ended in 1460 BC. The Hellenistic kingdoms had slowly been fracturing over time, and the formidable Roman military machine just systematically dismantled them. Following the Battle of Corinth, the Roman Republic formally absorbed the Greek peninsula, turning those once mighty, fiercely independent city-states into a Roman province.
But, as the Roman poet Horace so brilliantly noted, captive Greece took captive her uncivilized conqueror. Rome didn't destroy Greek culture, they were completely captivated by it. They adopted Greek architectural styles, Greek gods, and Greek philosophy. The Greek language even remained the lingua franca of the Eastern Empire. So rather than erasing Greece, Rome acted like a massive amplification vehicle, copying its culture and spreading it to the furthest corners of the Mediterranean and Europe.
Through Rome and later the Byzantine Empire, Greek archetypes became the foundational blueprints for the modern world. Think about it. When we study philosophy, we're still reacting to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. When we organize our governments, we look back to the citizen assemblies of Athens. When we sit in a math class, we're learning the exact geometric proofs laid out by Pythagoras and Euclid. Even our global entertainment, from the Olympic Games to the classic three-act structure of a Hollywood blockbuster, is distinctly Greek. So I'll leave you with this thought to reflect on. As you go about your day today, whether you're looking at the architecture of your local government buildings, reading a novel, or just engaging in a logical debate with a friend, ask yourself, just how much of your modern daily life was actually invented thousands of years ago in ancient Greece? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.